Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Migrating to OpenEdge 12.8. My name is Jessica Malakian, and I'll be today's moderator. For today's webinar, we have Roy Ellis. Roy started at Progress over 28 years ago in tech support. Roy then spent over 20 years in development helping to deliver products like App Server and Web Speed, OpenEdge Management, and most recently, the Progress Application Server for OpenEdge. Roy has been the Director of Managed Database Services for the past 2 years. And now I'll turn it over to Roy to start the presentation.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. Let's just start with a quick agenda. We're going to talk about migrating to 12.8 today, but much of the time is going to be spent talking about our migration from classic app server or web speed to the new PASWE for OpenEdge. Since this is many times the biggest concern that people are going through. So let's get right into it, shall we? So why upgrade to OpenEdge 12.8? Well, you've probably heard about LTS by now, right? Our long-term supported versions, where we offer stability by not adding any features in the LTS, and we give you a retirement date for when that release will end, right? So when it will retire. So during that period, you get bug fixes and security fixes, no features for good stability, and you know when it's going to be retired. So that's the LTS. Another good reason to move to 12.8 is for modernization. And of course, the last reason is because we've got many features added from 12.0 to 12.8. So why don't we start there? Here is a release-by-release review of the features from 12.0 to 12.8. You can see there were a lot, and these aren't all of them. This just shows you the biggest ones that we wanted to mention here. If you need more information on all the different features that have been added from 12.0 to 12.8, you can always Google, my favorite way to find things on the web, and you can just Google for the words OpenEdge, what's new 12. So that will find you a documentation page, which will list you through all of the different things that were added in all of the releases. All right, rather than going through the release by release for features, let's take a look at all the database upgrades that have happened since 12.0 to 12.8. There were several performance-related upgrades. The first one is the multi-threaded DB server, which means if you're connecting over a network, right, we now have a multi-threaded server which handles it instead of the one-at-a-time server way we used to do it. There have been many fixes to index. There have been performance updates to backups, and lots of different restore performance improvements and more. It's not listed here, but server-side joins, which we'll talk about in the ABL features, was part of the database, was also part of that. So that's another performance indicator that was part of the database. Another thing that's happened since 12 is there's been a lot of work to keep you up and running 24/7. Almost all of the database startup parameters can now be changed online. So you don't need to shut the database down just to make a parameter change. Many schema changes can now be done online, so you don't have to shut down for those. And there's been a lot more, right? Index checking multi-threaded, being able to check your backup, and so on and so forth. And not to be outdone, the ABL team has spent a lot of time adding new features and growing them along the way. The first one we'll talk about again was the server-side joins. In 12.0, we added it for each, and then every release after that, we added more server-side joins so that you're no longer dragging two tables over the network and doing the sort on them there. You're doing it on the database side, which is made for very, very fast server-side join queries if you're working over a network. We also continued our work on methods. So the OOABL, object-oriented ABL, is upgraded. We also started on OOABL collections, and they've been improved along the way. One of my favorite things was added, the Elvis operator. Well, thank you very much. That was done in 12.5. And two very exciting features were added, Kafka and dynamic data masking. Kafka allows you to interact with the Kafka messaging service right from the ABL. That came out in 12.5 and has, again, been updated and features added right through 12.8. The last feature added in 12.8 was dynamic data masking, which allows you to mask sensitive data in your application without making any code changes. So that's very cool. A lot of people were looking for it for security and for compliance issues. And then there have been a lot of improvements in other areas. Many security upgrades have been done and fixes, but we've also included signed R code and TLS 1.3 for network communication. In PAS-OE, we have OAuth 2 and SAML support added, and it's been upgraded and refined over the different releases. There have been improvements in PDSOE for your developer. We've added open telemetry monitoring included with the OpenEdge Command Center. So now you can go ahead and grab data, metrics information on your system and push it up to any tool that allows open telemetry as its compatible format. What else have we done? Oh, we've added support for .NET, .NET 6, both on Windows and on Linux. And again, if you want to find out more detail about any of these things, go ahead and go to our documentation, look for what's new, or just Google OpenEdge What's New 12. All right, so let's say you do want to move to 12.8. There's a lot of good reasons on the slides before. Here is your basic steps. Now, we've gone over this in other webinars, and of course, this is the happy path, right? So it's real simple. Install 12.8 on a development machine, and you can just copy that database over to that machine and run a conversion on it. It will take just minutes. And now you have a 12.8 database. Once you restart it, what you want to do is copy all your source code locally and compile it, and then fix any compile issues, right? Then what you want to do so that you can do some of your testing is make sure any third-party programs are set up, printers are set up, readers, that type of thing. And then you want to test. You want to do application testing, you want to do load testing, you want to do performance testing. And then once that machine is ready to go, been all tested, all your third-party stuff works, all your code is compiled and running, then it's real simple again to just shut down your current system, make a backup of that database, copy it over, and again, upgrade it. And again, this is the happy path. This is the broad strokes. And of course, well, there's always some gotchas, right? So some of the gotchas are, of course, if you're running 32-bit on your Windows clients and you want to move up to 64-bit, you're going to have to do some of that coding. You can still run 32-bit Windows code for your client, so it will still support 32-bit OCXs and DLLs. So we've given you that ability, but if you want to start moving up to 64-bit, that's some work. We've already talked about third-party integrations. That's been a problem for a lot of our customers. They've moved from older systems to newer systems, and some of the applications they were using, third-party applications, had changed or were no longer available, and they had to do some work on that. But the biggest concern for most people is they've been using classic app server web speed for many, many years, and there's a lot of work to go ahead and get that up and running and ready for a production service. So we'll talk about that for the rest of the slides. But as promised, I'm going to go ahead and give you links to all the things as we move along. So when you're done, I understand you're going to get a copy of this. So you can hit the links, and you'll be able to go ahead and click on these links and get information about everything we talked about and get you help along the way. So these are just the first two links. One is for documentation, and the other comes from our community. So give you information, again, that's similar to what I'm giving you now for upgrading OpenEdge 12. All right, so what is the Progress Application Server for OpenEdge? And I'm just going to say PAS for OpenEdge or PAS-OE as we move forward. But that's the new app server for OpenEdge if you haven't heard. It's based on standard-based delivery for application services using Tomcat as the service. It already has authentication built in with Spring Security, and it already has OpenEdge application support built in. So you're all set to go on that. It's been around for almost 10 years, so it's not new, right? We introduced it in 11.5. We added web speed support in 11.6, and we have been constantly upgrading, including new features in this product since then. If you're still on 11.7, then you've had no feature updates to the classic application server since 11.7.5, right? When that became a LTS product and we didn't add any features. So all the features have been going into PAS for OpenEdge. All right, so again, why PAS for OpenEdge? Well, we're using industry standard products. A lot of people use these. It has security built in. It is easier management. right? It's easier to deploy, it's easier to work on. We'll talk about that more in later slides. There's open monitoring built in. In the classic app server, all you could do is run an ASB-man query. In the PASOE, we give you so much information that sometimes it's hard to process and hard to get through it. But there's a lot of monitoring. It's available in a lot of different ways. And that makes it much better for moving forward and keeping it up and running in the future. I'm going to say it has a quick application upgrade, and that's got an asterisk on it, because usually the application upgrade from a classic app server to PASOE can be done in hours, right? So most of it can be up and running in hours, but that's when it gets trickier and gets a little bit harder. So we'll move on to that. It is cloud ready. PaaS for OpenEdge is cloud ready. If you wanted to run the classic app server or web speed in the cloud, it was much harder, especially if you wanted to do load balancing with the name server, you couldn't do it. So PaaS for OpenEdge was built to be used in the cloud and built to be able to scale. And also, it's your platform for modernization. We'll talk a little bit about it at the end. But having PaaSOE is a fast track to moving any application to a web-based interface. All right, just some quick notes about Classic App Server for PaaSOE. This is some testing we did early on. We were on a Linux OS, 24 CPUs, 8 gigabytes of memory, shared database connection, shared memory database connections from the clients, and we used our ATM performance testing tool, automatic teller machine simulator. And what we found was that PaaSOE uses resources much better and is faster on a lot of different things. Client connections, we could handle almost 5 times more client connections to PaaSOE over the Classic. We use less CPU, we use less memory, and transactions in the database were very, very fast. Now, people look at this and say, wow, my application is going to be 7 times faster. That's not true, because usually your TPS is not the problem. It's not your big gate. Usually it's a network or things like that. So although we saw better performance with both ABL client and web speed, your mileage may vary. Okay, so one of the first steps to being successful moving to PaaSOE is to understand it, right? This is something I've been saying for at least 7 years. PaaSOE is not the classic app server. And something Chad Thompson has been saying for several years now is avoid the anti-patterns. And what are we trying to say here? You can't treat PaaSOE like the classic app server or the classic web speed. Those things you used to do to monitor it, to keep it up and running, to tune it are different. Although it's doing the same thing, it's running ABO code, you have to sort of change your mindset about what you're doing and how you do it. And if you do that, things will get much better for you and the transition will be much less painful. So let's go on and let's see if we can do some understanding what PaaSOE is, shall we? So on the left is a diagram of a application in the classic world, right? We've got 3 different app servers running, or 2 app servers on a web speed. Each has to have 50 agents. You have to run an admin server. You're probably running a name server. You need to run a web server to allow for AIA, WSA, web speed, and so on. On the right is your classic PaaSOE, right? It's just 4 processes. It's the PaaSOE server broker running, which has all the transports built in, and it has 3 agents, each agent handling up to 150 sessions in this presentation. So it's a lot easier to manage than the classic app server web speed, which has a lot of different processes and didn't have a cohesive way of handling everything. All right, more understanding PaaSOE. There's only one network transport. It's HTTP, right? There's no TCP app server network transport. So you have to think HTTP is meant to be temporary. It doesn't stay open. The port doesn't stay open. So expecting an app server to stay connected to a client for several hours when there's nothing happening isn't going to happen. So you have to sort of reset your mindset on how clients connect to an app server and how they handle. As I said, or I didn't say before, but it's deployed in its own directory. PaaSOE gets its own directory structure. All of the configurations are in there. You can keep the code in there. So it makes it very simple to go ahead and move that PaaSOE instance around and to monitor it because it's all in its own directory. It's no longer controlled in the DLC properties in the ubroker.properties file. It has its own OpenEdge.properties, which is in the PaaSOE instance conf directory. And when you go look in there, it's going to look very, very similar to what you've seen in the ubroker.properties. So you can use a lot of the same information you understand from before in the OpenEdge.properties for PAS-OE, but it is different. The other thing, if you're controlling your classic app server, web speed, name server, adapters, you had different commands for all of those. With PAS-OE, you have a tcman command in the instance directory, or there's a PASMan and $DLC, and you manage your PAS-OE with that going forward. So again, some differences that make your life easier, hopefully, but it can also, if you're using anti-patterns, can make your life more difficult. All right, and what I like to call the secret sauce of PAS-OE is the multi-session agent. As I mentioned before in the drawing, one agent can handle hundreds of requests. I ran a test where an agent was handling 400 requests on a machine, one agent concurrently. So it can handle it. We have lots of customers that are running one agent that's handling hundreds of requests. But some people are trying to run multiple agents and thinking, oh, hey, those requests will round robin between the agents. They don't. PAS-OE is designed to use as much on the first agent as possible. And when that first agent fills up completely, then it'll go to the second agent. So people are complaining, hey, one agent's growing memory or using up all the CPU and the other one's just sitting idle. And that's by design. So again, you can't treat it like the classic app server where it would round robin requests. This is how it was meant to work. The other difference is if you're collecting through the shared memory of the database login, there's an extra thread, right, that handles all of the ABL sessions. So it's called PASA. And again, the classic app server, if you found something that you thought was misbehaving, you would go into ProMonitor and you would disconnect that session you thought was causing you a problem. So if you accidentally disconnected the administrator, you would then disconnect all of the ABL sessions. So figure 100 clients using the database will disconnect, which again would be bad. So we want to make sure that looking at this, you spend the time to understand and take a look at how that thread is different in the ProMon versus the other ones. Okay, so let's talk about application migration for your PAS-OE, right? So first thing you want to do is install PAS for OpenEdge if you haven't already. Installation, you know the commands for that. And then you need to create a PAS-OE instance, right? Again, it's not something that's in your OpenEdge.properties. It's something that will create a directory on your system. The command is PASMan. In this case, it's in the $DLC because you haven't created one yet. And that will create your PAS instance. Now, there's lots of other parameters you can add to this. So I didn't want to put them all in here. I'll give you a link later to your PASMan and TCMan commands that will do this for you. But basically, we're creating an instance to run our application on. The next thing you're going to do are things you did in your classic app server, right? You're going to go in to, instead of the ubroker.property, you're going to go into the OpenEdge.properties and you're going to add your code into the ProPath section, right? So that you have that PAS-OE looking for the code that you want to run. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and you add your database connections parameters in the OpenEdge.properties, just like you did in the ubroker.properties. No changes there. At this point, you'll have default parameters for number of agents, number of connections to agents, but that's okay. We're just setting up for the application migration, right? The next thing you do is just copy all your source code into the ProPath. At this point, you could compile it, but you can also just run it as long as you have a development license. So you can go ahead and start up your PAS for OpenEdge instance, right? Here are the commands here. But these are the 12.8 commands. OE server is a newer moniker here, so you might want to just use tcman start. But again, I'll give you a link to all the different rules you can use. But it's a simple command to start it up and get it running. Once it's up and running, the code is available. Then you want to connect with a classic app server client, right? So what you used to do before was give it the host, give it the name server port, and you would give it the name of the application server that's listed. In this case, everything is going to be -URL because everything is HTTP or HTTPS, right? So every connection will now be -URL, HTTP or HTTPS, the host name and the port where that PAS-OE instance is running. And if you're going to use classic app server, you're going to use APSV as the transport, right? And then it's just your path and your code that you want to run. Very similar. You just want to make sure you change that for your clients. Same thing for the web speed, right? It used to be you always use URL for that anyway. The URL would now be HTTP, host port, and you use the word web. You probably use CGI bin and called out the CGI script before, and then you called out the path to your code. Well, you don't need that anymore. It's now host and port and web, and you're up and running. And you should be able to start testing your application at this point. Like I said, we've had people who've turned this on and basically it worked right out of the box. We've had people who had extra coding around things they had, authentication and other things, and it took them a little longer. But we were able to get many people up and running in development and getting this started in a very short amount of time. Okay, things you should know. Application code memory leaks must be fixed. What we did in the classic app server and classic web speed is we retired agents if they weren't being used. So if you had memory leaks in your code, you didn't see them because we would clean up those agents constantly. When we released PASOE, customers were having huge problems with the agents using all the memory up. And we did not have the tools to help them fix that, right? We had old tools from classic app server. Since then, we've added a way to go ahead and find memory leaks, not just for code, but for memory objects and everything else. And in PASOE, so that you can do that, and you can do it with the system up and running, right? So you can go ahead and find the problems, make the changes without actually having to bring PASOE down using our REST APIs. So again, here is a link to that tool that allows you to find memory leaks. Better to find this in your testing than before production, but even if you have to go into production with some, you can go ahead and use this in production. If you don't fix your memory leaks before you go to production and the PASOE agent starts to grow, we learned about something called the out-of-memory killer, right? So if your agent grows and grows and grows and uses up all the memory, there's two things that will happen. One, your machine will become unresponsive and you'll have to restart it. The other one is if you're running on a newer operating system and you have this turned on, there's an out-of-memory killer, which will go ahead and find the largest memory user and kill it before the system becomes unresponsive. So if you start to see that once you've set PASOE out, that all of a sudden the agent is disappearing for no reason whatsoever, it's probably the out-of-memory killer. We found this was the biggest problem when most people were moving to PASOE. They didn't realize they had memory leaks, and they were just saying the PASOE agent was going away, and it was the out-of-memory killer handling it. So once you get it up and running and you start testing, this is your first priority to see if you can take care of any memory leaks that might be in your code. Another thing you need to look for is calls to the operating system are very costly to performance, right? Always command, input from, input output. That can cause some high performance issues. So if you're doing a lot of that, you may want to talk to our consulting group because they have processes and ways to get around that. So that's just something to look out for. It may not cause you any problems, but if you start to see performance problems and you're using these commands, something you may want to look at. Another thing, of course, is, hey, if you're calling out to external libraries, the PAS agent is multi-threaded or multi-session. And if you're calling out, you have to make sure that whatever library is using are thread safe. And if they're not, go ahead and tell PASOE that they're not, so it handles them correctly. So this information is in the OpenEdge.properties.readme, and we'll tell you which one to use. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that was there. Some people were using libraries they thought were thread safe, and they weren't. So they were able to change the setting and be up and running fairly quickly. Another anti-pattern, or what things used to do with the classic app server, was they would kill a multi-session agent if it started to use too much memory. If it started to run 100% of the CPU, they would just kill the multi-session agent. And again, like we talked about, if you have 100 clients using that agent, you're going to have 100 disconnects from the database and 100 very unhappy clients. So there's a way to tell that session to shut down. It'll let it finish up all of what it's doing now, and then it will call any new request will go to a new agent. So that's the way you want to go ahead and shut down that agent, not killing it. And lastly, long-running batch jobs. they need to be reconsidered for PaaS or OpenEdge, right? If you were running a batch job that would go several hours, remember we don't have the TCP connection we used to have. This is now a web server with an HTTP connection, and it will disconnect and your batch job will have nowhere to send its results. So there's different ways to handle this, but you need to understand that going in. So you need to look for any long-running batch jobs you had your classic app server running. Okay, so that's all your work you're doing as you get ready to go to production. As you're preparing for production, again, I said this before and I'll say it again, test application, do a load test on your application, test for load balancing, test for performance, do all of those things. For performance, you're going to need to tune your PaaS-OE instance, right? It has number of agents, it has number of ABL sessions, it has how many connections you're going to allow into the front end of Tomcat. The first thing you want to do is go into your 11.7 and run a PaaS prop conf or PaaS property converter. And this will get you a OpenEdge properties file that you can use to set your basis for when you start your production performance testing and load testing. So, and again, another link to get you there. Another thing to prepare for production is run as many ABL sessions on one agent as you can, right? Because the first agent is going to run everything anyway. And it's always good to have a standby agent after that. So if everything's running on the first agent, I have a standby or a spare agent, not doing anything. But if I need to shut down the first agent because it's running out of memory or it's using too much CPU or it's giving me errors, then I can go ahead and use a command in the REST API, that bullet underneath, and I can tell that first agent, okay, don't accept any new requests, finish up the request you're running now, and we will divert all of the requests coming in from now on to the spare agent, right? So it's seamless. No clients will know there was an interruption, and then we can start up another agent for the next time we need to do this. Again, a different thought process from the classic app server. The last thing I'm going to say, and I say this a lot, monitor your PaaS-OE application. There's so many ways to monitor it now, and maybe that's the problem. But the first thing to do is pick away and monitor it. You know, at least pick one, maybe pick two. If you're first going out and you're running and you don't know if you have memory issues in your code or you think you might, then I would definitely pick at the application, the PaaS-OE Health Scanner, which will not only keep an eye on the health of your PaaS-OE instance, but it will also tell you how much memory is being used on the system so that you can stay on top of that. All right, so covered a lot, and it can be daunting. Again, this is the biggest concern for most people, but there is a lot of help out there. There is a lot of documentation available for PaaS-OE. This is the homepage is docs.progress.com. There is a great documentation page on migrating to PaaS for OpenEdge. It shows you much of the things we just talked about here. This main page here will have links that bring you out to certain areas and talk about a lot of things I talked about. There's also a TC-man reference. Again, you're not using the ASB man, the WTB man, you're not using NS man. So you just need to understand the TC-man command a little bit. It's very simple, start, stop, that type of thing. But good to understand it before you move in and good to be comfortable with it before you go to production. The Progress community, I hope you're part of the Progress community. That is where people like yourself can ask questions, can share information, and where we also keep our knowledge base. So things that have already been covered before and the knowledge base has been written on will be found on the Progress community website. So again, the main page, and again, there's a great reference page on doing where to find out more about the PaaS-OE deployment, and again about TC-man, how to start an instance and different options that work on it and examples on how to use it. And if you just want to get your feet wet real quick, start to see how things are working, have someone walk you through the process. There's a couple of great videos out there getting started with the PaaS for OpenEdge. And then there's one about migrating the classic app server applications for PaaS for OpenEdge. Those are great, and they get your feet wet very quickly and get you started on your migration before you go look at documentation. Lastly, if you're thinking of coming to the PUGs, there'll be some presentations on PaaS-OE and there'll be some workshops on it. The presentation will be monitoring paths for OpenEdge. Like I said, there's lots of different ways to do it. We'll explore the different ways to do it and what might work best for you so that when you walk out, you might have an idea which way you want to start your monitoring of PASOE. There's some workshops, one that used to be called Tips and Tricks for PASOE. We're now calling Migrating Classic App Server for PASOE. And then if you have PASOE in production, how do you support that? Because again, it is different than your classic app server, and you don't want to treat it like a classic app server. So these are 3-hour workshops each that you can sign on if you're going to be at the PUG challenges in either Europe or in the US. And if you aren't going yet and you think you might want to, go ahead and go to this website, pugchallenge.org, and you can go ahead and pick where you want to go. And if you want to go to these workshops, you'll be able to sign up for those also. Last but not least is help from our professional services group. We have a team of consultants and database administrators who have helped many customers migrate to 12 and to PASOE. We've helped migrate the application, we've helped migrate the databases, we've helped migrate PASOE. We help you tune for production. Again, not only the database, but the application and PASOE. We can help you debug that and debug performance issues. We've helped people actually with the migration from PASO OpenEdge, and we've had people who did the migration themselves. When they got into production, they had performance issues, and that's where we came in and helped with performance issues with PASOE. The professional services group can help you secure your application. Moving to PASOE has all these security features in it, and you probably won't use them right out of the box, but get us involved if you want to start improving your application security with PASOE and so on. Then we can see if there's any other area you might need to use in the OpenEdge world to secure your application. Finally, modernization. If you move to PASOE, there's lots of ways to modernize your system. Something that we have, which is called AMAT, or Accelerated Modernization and Advanced Tooling, allows you, once you've moved your classic application to PASOE, to then start modernizing it pages at a time using the PASOE built-in code that's ready to go, handling REST requests. So if you're interested in that, or you're interested in anything to help you move from any version before 12 to 12, then go ahead and see us at this website, and we'll be glad to help you with that. All right. So in summary, move to OpenEdge 12.8. It's going to be just supported until 2030, so we're into the next decade. So it's going to be around for a long time. If you're going to move to 12.8, your biggest concern will probably be having to move your classic app server and web speed to PAS for OpenEdge. So spend the time to understand it, spend the time to get comfortable with it. And if you're going to move to 12.8, test, not just for PASOE, but for your application, right? Application testing, load testing, performance testing. And there's a lot of great reasons to move to 12.8. But if you're concerned, there is help available, right? We have a documentation, the community and K-bases, we have consulting. So there's lots of ways you can move forward with this. In the bottom right-hand corner and on the first slide is my email address, ellis@progress.com. I've been giving this out for over 20 years. If you have a question about this that didn't get answered, or you wanted to just give me a quick question after this presentation, go ahead and give me an email and I'll be glad to answer it. And your answer may be, I don't know, but I'll try and find out one for you. All right. I think that's it for me. Jessica?
Great. Thank you, Roy. So now we'll turn over to our live Q&A session. So Roy, are you ready to get started?
I am here. Hit me.
Great. So the first question is there any update to the certification of 12.8 on Ubuntu Linux?
I don't have an update right now. I can tell you that there is the product compatibility guide, which is on our Progress website. I always find that, again, by using my friend Google, typing OpenEdge compatibility guide 12.8, and it'll give you the information. I know that the certification is in the plans, and it should be out in the near future. So, so stand by.
Okay, great. The next question is how to upgrade from 10.1a straight to 12.8.
Okay, so that one should be fairly the same. I'm pretty sure that you can upgrade your database directly from 10 to 12, but if not, there are conversion commands that will do it from 10.1 to 10.2b, or the most recent version, the latest version of version 10, and then you can upgrade to 12.8. But I think there's a route where you can just convert the database directly from 10 to 12. If not, it would be a couple of steps. And as for the rest is the same, right? Once you get the database converted, you bring your source code over and you recompile it on 12. So really, it shouldn't be that much of a difference, and it shouldn't be that much more of a lift. But if you have further questions, let me know, and I'll try to get you an answer or send you a link for that.
Okay. The next question is, do you put the program name in the URL?
Okay, so that was wrong. Vim caught me on that. For the URL for the connection string for the app server, you don't put the code in because the app server passes that. So thank you for catching me on that. It's only where you set, it's only the web speed one where you actually send the code. So thank you for that, Vim.
Okay, great. And also looks like there was a comment about a link, just making sure that the paths for OpenEdge instance documentation link, it might be invalid, but also that could also be case sensitivity. So maybe we'll just send a link right after this, Roy. Is there a link that we should be sending out to customers after this?
Yeah, so I think if you click the link in the in the actual presentation, it works. But if I will check that and verify it. It looks like it was a case sensitivity thing because, you know, typical developer, it worked for me. But we'll take a look at that. And if there is a problem, we'll let you know.
Great. Okay. The next question is, how do we pass the client principal back and forth to the paths for OpenEdge, or maybe better, a session ID to retrieve the stored client principal from a session table in the database?
That's a really good question. That's not something I'm very good at. I know that our consulting team has helped people, and I know there are other people who might be able to answer that. So let me get that answer, and we'll post that in the in all of the answers when we send them out and put them on the community site. So I know it can be done. I know there are different ways to do it. It will depend on your application and how you want to do that. So.
Okay. And the next question is, in a more generic way, I understood there's context kept for every connected client to the paths for OpenEdge. Can you tell a bit more about that, how to set and how to retrieve on the server side?
So I think that's, again, the same question. And again, it depends, right? You can send data back and forth on the HTTP cookies. You can also send it back through environment variables and things like that. So I think I would need to know the specific situation you're looking for and how to handle that. And again, that's probably more for developers than for me. But again, I'll see if I can get a generic answer back and see if that helps.
Okay. This question is, at the moment, I have Progress 11.7 web speed. The web speed agent run on the database server with shared memory access. The web server is on an extra server in DMZ security reason. Is this also possible with paths for OpenEdge?
So I think the question is, does PASOE, can it access shared memory? Yes, it can. It's the same ABL process that we've always had. The ABL sessions are the same. So you can access the shared memory. The question is, do you want to have your database and PASOE in the DMZ? You probably don't. So you probably want to have something in the DMZ. If you want to run PASOE connecting directly to the database server, you want to have that outside the DMZ. So run a load balancer or a NAT or something like that in the DMZ and send everything back to PASOE in the database within your firewall system. That'd be best. Also, you're saying you're connecting shared memory access for performance reasons. With a lot of the performance upgrades to the database and to the code in 12.8, you may find that the performance reasons don't exist anymore. It'll depend on your application, but it might be something to look at. The reason is because if you want to scale out and have more PASOEs over different systems, you want to go to, you can't run shared memory with that anyway, so going to a network setup might be the best thing to think about. The answer is yes. but maybe you want to take a look at running in a network and not a shared memory to see how that performs also.
Okay. Next question is, can you install version 11 and 12 on the same developer machine, or will I face conflicts?
Okay, so the answer is yes, you can. The second answer is yes, you may face conflicts. A lot of the ports and things are run on a lot of the processes run on the same ports and can overlap. The first one that comes to mind is the admin server. So if you install 11, then you install 12 and try to start up the admin server for 12, since it has the same listening port, it would not start because 11 is already running on there. So so that's the big one that I know of. And if you set up the databases with the same ports, again, that's the biggest problem. So yes, on Windows and any HP system, I'm sorry, HP, any Unix system, you can run them on the same machine, but there may be some ports you need to look at. But there's no other technical reasons why they wouldn't work.
Okay. Is there an easy way to monitor when agents are reaching their limit and new agents are starting or stopping?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of, again, I didn't go deeply into the monitoring, but there are different ways to monitor the product. All of them come back to JMX beans, which are Java beans that are built into Tomcat, and we are compliant with all of that. So usually I recommend the REST API, and you can keep an eye on all of the agents that are running. And if one starts up or one goes away, that'll be listed in there. There's also the log files, which will tell you if something started or stopped. So yes, there's definitely a way to do it if that's what you're looking for. And again, I think just having a good monitor up and running using the REST APIs will tell you that. And again, the log file will tell you that. So yes, the answer is yes. I'd be wondering why you want to know if the agents are starting and stopping, if there's a specific problem there. So let me know.
Okay. The next question is, we already use Tomcat as a web server. Is it possible to combine that Tomcat with PaaS for OpenEdge, or do we still need both?
So PaaS for OpenEdge is a Tomcat web server. I'm not sure if the question means, can I continue to run the things I'm running on my Tomcat web server and add that to the PaaS Tomcat? It depends on that situation. Yes, you could run other applications on the PaaS Tomcat web server, but if what you want to do is take the broker and the agents and load that into your Tomcat that you're already using, that won't work. Right? We're very tightly integrated with the Tomcat and with the Spring Security. So if you tried to do that, that would fail. But if you wanted to see if those applications would work on our Tomcat, on the PaaS Tomcat, then that will probably work, as long as it isn't invasive in the same way that ours is invasive in the Tomcat. So let me know if that answered your question. If it isn't, add another question, and if we don't get to it today, we'll get to it afterwards.
Great. The next question is, what is an average time that company makes migration from 11.7 to the latest version, including PaaS for OpenEdge, and get from dev environment to stable production?
So that's that's a good question. Like I said, we've had people who have got the application up and running in hours or days, and then they have to do all the testing. Right? What we find is that the customers who do the testing and do the research and prepare to move to 12 and to PaaS, they'll spend months doing that to make sure it's right and to make sure it's good. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't start this project and be in production within 6 months. But again, the long pole is going to be the testing, right? You can convert quickly, you can get PaaS up and running quickly, and then you have to go through all the different testing that needs to happen. And as we know, the applications that are written on OpenEdge can be very complex. You can have lots of different angles and things like that. So, like I said, I've seen it happen in 6 months. I know companies that won't ever make a change unless they've been on it for 12 months. It's definitely a very wide range depending on your application, depending on how much time you can put on it.
Okay, great. And next is installing an SSL certificate easy on PaaS for OpenEdge?
Wow, the first question is anything with security easy? Yes, there are K-bases out there on how to do it. It is the same as installing an SSL certificate for the Tomcat, right? Because really, this is Tomcat that handles the SSL certificate out to the HTTPS, and then so that the HTTPS in and out is a Tomcat thing, and you use the Tomcat key stores and things like that. So if you're used to that, you can do that easily. If you're not used to that, there are K-bases that tell you how to do that. The next thing is if you're running SSL from PASOE to the database and you want to encrypt, and that is actually now called TLS, right? If you want to encrypt that from the PASOE agent to the database over the network, that is the same as it was in 11.7, in early versions of 12, and it's the same as it is with the classic app server. So again, there's documentation how to do that, and knowledge bases how to do that. So, so yes, that's available, and it's quite possible to do it. And once you've done it a few times, you'll find it easy, I'm sure.
Great. All right, well, thank you, Roy, for that great presentation and the Q&A. That's all we have time for today. We got a lot of questions, so if we didn't get to one of your questions today, we'll make sure to reach out after this call and follow up in the next couple of days. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question and you still would like to, please respond to the email that will have ways to contact us, or reach out via the Ideas portal or the CBP, and Roy also had his email included in his slides. So we'll be able to answer things a lot more quickly over there on the Ideas portal and the CBP. So thank you everyone who attended today's webinar, and thank you, Roy, and have a great rest of your day.